Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Hope you all are doing fine. हमारा भाई सारे ने All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll wait for a few more people to join before we start. How's my audio? Is it okay? Oh, someone said no audio. It's perfect. Okay, good. That's good. Don't have my mic right now, but it's good to know that the audio is great. Like at least okay. Cool. All right, all right, all right. Interesting session today, slightly more beginner friendly, I would say. Reason for that being this is orientation for front end, what we're covering today. For that reason, might feel a little slow for people who already have done DOM manipulation a bit, HTML, CSS, more specifically how to manipulate DOM. This will be like a breeze, probably something you should just skip. If you have not done front end at all, specifically if you have not done DOM, then it will be an interesting class. Try to structure it, you know, assignment driven, but fairly basic assignments. So hopefully by the end of it, you know how to create basic front ends, and eventually we will get to React in a while. But until we get there, this class should be a decent orientation for it. Okay, we'll start in 1 more minute. Let me share my screen here. Let me also start recording. We will wait for another minute. Tab tak feel free to stretch a little bit. And we'll start at 7:03. These are the topics at a high level for this week. So if you already know this, then feel free to skip the class. It will be really slow. If you have not done any of this yet, then it will be an interesting class. Okay? Chalo ji, let's start it. Week 4.1. What are we covering this week? Basic front end, DOM, dynamic front ends, and connecting a front end to a backend. We don't have to worry too much about writing backends for this week. I know a few people are still confused about MongoDB, and there will be a bunch of offline videos for that. So don't worry too much if you don't understand backends yet, especially this specific week should be completely disjoint from all the backend stuff we've done until now. You will need to know the basic JavaScript syntax though. Tomorrow, we will do Chrome developer tools and why front-end frameworks try to create a simple intuition for React. And then next week onwards is when we will see how do you actually use front-end frameworks to create front-ends. This week is going to be archaic front-ends, how they used to be written from in like 2009, 2008, when React was not a thing. Okay? If you look at the complete syllabus, the things on the green are things we've covered well. Things on the yellow are things we will have more offline videos on. Foundations of JavaScript, asynchronous nature of JavaScript and Node.js and its runtime, hopefully straightforward by now. Backend में understanding communication protocols. HTTP is a thing. There are other ways for frontends to talk to backends. Express basic to advanced middlewares, routes, status codes, and global caches and Zord. These are the things we have covered. The things in yellow, specifically SQL, we still need to cover. And even Mongo and NoSQL databases, we will spend some more time on in offline videos. This week is going to be the foundation for this, not even this. We will try to cover reconcilers tomorrow, but even if we don't, that is fine. We want to create the best intuition for front-end frameworks and understand how can you write front-end without the need of a framework like React. That is what this week is going to be. Okay. Everything else that you see here is, very closely related to React. After we do React is when we will dive into all of this. DevOps, forget for a while, at least a month. Projects, forget for a while, at least a month. GSOC specifically, I will be releasing videos from this week onwards where I'll set up projects locally and, just try to solve a small issue here and there. I'll try to cover as many projects as I can. main projects building Paytm will come in a while. Okay, that's a high level overview of where we are in the cohort. This is what we have covered. This is what we will try to cover this week. Cool. DOM. Let's start there. As I said, the week is going to be how to create front ends, websites without using React. And DOM is going to be a very big part of it. What does DOM stand for? It stands for Document Object Model. It is a jargon. Don't even worry about why these three words and what do they mean. This is the official definition. Let's read through it really quickly. It says the DOM API is a programming interface for web documents. It represents the page so that the page can change the document structure, style, and content. The DOM represents the document as a tree of objects. Each object represents a part of the page. Very high level, extremely jargony. Just a definition to know. Even if you don't understand it word to word right now, does not matter. I just copied it from Google and pasted it here. Never do I need to explain the definition of DOM to anyone. I do need to understand how to use it though, which is what we will cover today. Let's start with before DOM. What was JavaScript? A quick recap. It was an implementation of the ECMAScript spec. This is a specification that some really smart people have written in a doc. They said, "Ke bhaiya, where is a thing? Const is a thing. Let is a thing. Function is a thing. Objects are there. Arrays are there. Every array should have a dot length function, so on and so forth." And then very smart people wrote implementations of the spec. For example, we discussed Google Chrome has actually written this thing called the V8 engine, which takes some JavaScript code, converts it into 0 to 1. This is one of many compilers of JavaScript. They are written on top of ECMAScript. This is the people who write the spec. This is the people who write the actual compiler. Mozilla Firefox has its own compiler. This is the Chrome compiler, and then Safari has its own, Internet Explorer had its own, so on and so forth. But the JavaScript that runs in your browser has some extra functionality. These smart people wrote the spec for a language. They never thought or imagined, I say little they imagined, but not too much. Okay, this will be primarily used in the front end. This will be primarily used in the browser. They said we are writing a language. Language is supposed to do 10 different things: functions, objects, arrays, integers, numbers, strings. We will support that. That is what is written. The people who wrote the browser said, "Ke bhaiya, okay, this is good, but the browser needs to support a bunch of other things." If you remember this example of ours from Lupe, the famous website, if you remember, we've gone to this website a few times now. This website lets you visualize what happens anytime you run some JavaScript code. And one common thing we saw happen was, yeah, there is a call stack, there is a callback queue, there is an event loop. There is this section called Web APIs. What is this section? If you remember, whenever I run some code, set timeout used to reach here. We said, okay, there is someone else keeping track of the clock. This specific 5-second clock is not maintained by JavaScript, is not maintained by the it is maintained by the browser. It is not maintained by this sort of V8 engine. Maybe it is actually, I'm not sure. But JavaScript never said, set timeout needs to be a thing. If you go to ECMAScript standard, ECMAScript 2020, you'll find a very big doc that says, these are the data types that we need to have. There is a Boolean data type, a null data type, a string data type. You will not find set timeout anywhere here. Neither will you find set. I'm seeing too many alerts. Are we good? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys see me? We good? Oh, wait, hold on. Some people are saying the screen is black. So people who think everything is good, please don't message. People who think something is wrong. Is there something wrong and what is wrong? Screen share. Can't see the whole screen. Let me reshare the screen. हेलो भाई, क्या हुआ? कैन यू गाइस सी द स्क्रीन नाउ गाइस? अब ठीक है? ओके, सॉरी अबाउट दैट. What was I saying? I was saying this is the ECMAScript standard, and this was the Lupe website. This website has a web API section. Anytime I run this, set timeout reaches here. There is someone else keeping track of this clock, not this ECMAScript core. If you go to ECMAScript standard and you search for, you see a bunch of things here. Ki, date is something, data types, numbers are here, there is a global object, things like these. You will never find set timeout here. Why? Because set timeout was never part of the ECMAScript standard. The people who wrote JavaScript never thought that, this is something that will be needed. Never thought that ECMAScript needs to support clocks or, timeouts. This is something that people who were writing these browsers were like, yaar, this is not enough. We need, at the very least, set timeout. We also need to send HTTP calls using fetch. So this is something that other smart people who were writing browsers brought into the picture. Okay, we will give some extra functionality on top of JavaScript. So if this is the JavaScript spec, the things that you see written here, which is set timeout, set interval, the fetch call that we saw last week, and there is this global document object that we will come to. This is what sort of DOM means when I keep saying DOM. All of this is not part of the JavaScript spec. It is a smaller subset. These things people added on top. Ke bhaiya, browser needs these functionalities. Thank you, JavaScript. We will implement all of this and these things on top so that a browser can do everything it is supposed to. What is a browser supposed to do? It is supposed to, render a website. And if I go to, let's say, LinkedIn, it's supposed to do 10 different things. There was a loader. And then as I scroll down, more things tend to load on the screen. This is something that you cannot do just with JavaScript. You have to send what are called asynchronous backend calls. As I keep scrolling, new data keeps coming in. JavaScript has no real, implementation of this written anywhere. So browser people said extra things we will give. Even Node.js, if you look at it, this is the JavaScript spec. Set timeout even in Node.js, or even, the HTTP library, the Express library I was saying is written on top of the HTTP library. The people who wrote Node.js said, yeah, this is a bare minimum use case. Someone would want to build an HTTP server on the backend if they're using JavaScript on the backend. So HTTP library, the file system library, whoever wrote Node.js said, yeah, a backend project needs to be able to access the file system, right? So for that reason, file system, HTTP, and even set timeout, set interval in Node.js are also auxiliary APIs, not the JavaScript spec, not part of the JavaScript spec. Okay? But we are not worried about Node.js at all for this class. This class is focused on the browser, and browser maybe there is set timeout, there is fetch, there is set interval. The thing that we are focused on is document. These we have already covered a little bit. Fetch we will see a little bit more today, but set timeout and set interval not focused on today. We will focus on this document object, this thing that I'm saying, some extra thing that browsers give you. Node.js does not. If you try to write Node.js in your machine, in your node, if you try to write document, sorry, one second, there's too much echo here. One second. All right. I was saying, if you try to write document in a Node.js application, it will tell you document does not exist. But if you try to write document in a browser-based application, it will tell you that document is something. This is what I call DOM, and DOM has a very weird official documentation, but this gives you a bunch of functions, is what effectively DOM is for us, and is how we're going to what's called manipulate the DOM, which is going to be the talk for today. Okay. So high level, what have we done until now? Let's do a quick recap. I said people wrote JavaScript engines on top of the ECMAScript spec. When we went to Lupe, the website, we saw things like set timeout were part of the web API spec. And this is something browsers provide you on top of the original JavaScript spec. And just like browsers provide you some browser specific functionality, Node.js provides you some backend specific functionality, which is again not part of the JavaScript spec. These are some of them. The one that we are focused on is document. This is what we will use today to create a simple front end. Cool. Let's write some code. Let's try to create a basic HTML page with 2 input boxes and a button that says calculate sum. You can do this locally. You can do this on Replit. The goal is by the end of it, we have a functioning website that lets you calculate sum. And then if things go well, by the end of the class, we will create another front end that lets you calculate the interest given a principal amount and some interest rate. We will get there when we get there. Okay? So let's try to create this simple website. This is a static website. Clicking on a button doesn't need to do anything. 2 input boxes and a button. We have covered this during orientation, so shouldn't take more than a minute. So I would urge you to either open an HTML file locally or go to Replit, create an HTML, CSS, JavaScript project. Either works. I'm going to maybe use Replit. Feel free to create it locally as well. That is totally fine. Create an empty, I'll do both. So that way you can do whatever you want amongst them. Go to Replit, type HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and click on create REPL. Or go to your machine, go to a specific folder in your machine and create an empty folder here, call it class-4 and open class-4 in Visual Studio Code. This is probably the better way to do it. You probably want to do it locally. I'm seeing Replit sort of struggling here. Open Visual Studio Code, file, open week-4. What was it called? Class-4, sorry. Open. And I have an empty file here. Add an empty index.html file. Let's just do it locally, actually. It's just good for everyone to test this out locally. Going to wait for 20 seconds for you guys to be able to catch up and open an empty project locally with index.html. Let's take a small break, guys. I have a better mic. Let me make sure. See if I can connect it. All right, let's see. Hello, hello, mic testing. Is this mic better, guys? Give me a yes or a no. This mic is better? Same? Yes? All right. I'll take that as a yes. Let me know if your mind changes. Are we good? Can I proceed? Is the mic okay? Yes or no? Yes. Alrighty. Good to go. So let's create a simple HTML project. Let me add a body tag here. If you don't know this, you haven't done the orientation well. It should be as simple as input type equal to text, placeholder equal to whatever, first number, slash input. Probably don't need the slash input, but that's fine. Then another one, let me increase the font size. Call this second number. And finally a button. Calculate sum. If I add these 3 lines, you will see a very nice basic HTML page, if I'm able to open it. Here, first number, second number, and calculate sum. I can actually move them one line below the other. For that, let me add a break tag here. Here and here. Refresh, first number, last number, calculate sum. I was able to create whatever the initial assignment was. Here, where is the head tag? Don't worry about it. It's not necessary, not needed. Even the body tag is not needed. I can actually remove all of this if need be. But for now, let's let this be. This is a basic code to create this skeleton, but it doesn't do anything yet. If I put a number here and put a number here and click on calculate sum, nothing is happening because I've added no functionality to the button. I only have a basic skeleton. Going to wait for 15 seconds for if someone hasn't written this code. Feel free to write this code locally because we'll be building on top of this. 15 more seconds. All right, let's go back to the slides. Sorry, this may be very irritating. I'm so sorry. So we have created a simple website here, but making them dynamic is hard. What do I mean when I say making it dynamic? Changing the element on the website once the website is loaded is what dynamic means. This is a very important statement, probably the foundation for why we need a React or a framework like React. Changing the elements on the website once the website is loaded is what I mean when I say dynamic. If I go to LinkedIn, the website has loaded once. Chalo, theek hai, I have a website. This is a good snapshot of the website. I see some things. As I scroll, the content of the website is changing. More things are getting added one by one. More posts are being fetched from somewhere and getting appended to the end of this list. As you can see, the scroll bar keeps on increasing. This is what I mean when I say making a website dynamic. Making them dynamic is hard. And what do I mean when I say dynamic? Changing the elements on the website once the page has loaded. This load happens once. And then if there are more changes that are coming, that is what I mean when I say making the website dynamic. That is the same thing as if I click on calculate sum, the sum is 300 appears here. Putting this specific text over here at the end of your website after someone clicks on a button is also sort of considered making the website dynamic, adding some functionality to it that was not originally there. On the initial node, the HTML that you saw, and after I click on this button, the HTML that you see are significantly different. Something got added to the end, an H1 tag, a P tag, something. Text somehow got added at the end. This is what is called the website being dynamic. Actually calculating the sum based on the inputs and rendering it on the screen is what's called website being dynamic. And this part is slightly hard. That's what DOM facilitates for you to do. And in the longer term, that's what React makes it very easy for you. That's one of the reasons you need React. Mic is very unstable, guys. All right. Before we proceed to actually solving this specific use case, let's understand a little bit about classes and IDs in HTML because it's sort of important when you're getting into DOM. Let's say we want to have similar divs in two places, basically a div1 and div2. This one says hi there, this one says hi there too, and the style is exactly the same. Background color red, margin 10 pixels and padding of 10 pixels. Some very nicely spaced two div elements. What is the problem in this approach? What am I doing here? What principle is this violating? It is violating the dry principle. I am repeating myself two times. If they need to be exactly the same, Wouldn't it be nice if I could take both of them, all this style, and put it somewhere else, and both of them could just use the style from there? That would be great, Harkirat. For that, we use classes in HTML. If I go to the next slide, you will see last minute changes I made here. You will see I can get the same outcome if I create a style, or more specifically, add a tag here saying by anyone who has the container class. These are the styles that you will get. And below, when I am defining div1 and div2, I say div class equal to container, which is the name that I've written here. There are a few things that are done here. Let's break it down. Let's actually try to code the same thing locally. Okay. Let's get rid of all the code that I had. Let me re-add body tag. And let me add two tags. Div1 says hi there. Div2 says hi there too. I need to give both of them the same style. What is approach one? I add inline styles. Okay, bhai, style equal to background color red. And same thing here. This is good, but what is the problem? The problem is I am repeating my code twice. So why not create? And you might ask, never mind, we'll get that. I say, okay, I'm going to give the first div class container, and the second div also a class container. And I am going to add not inline styles, but a style tag at top, which are called external styles. It's actually an external style. If I put this in a different .css file, this is, I don't know what this is called, like top level styles, whatever the name might be. The thing that I have to write here is dot container, which means anything that has the container class associated with it, give it a background color of red. What will this do? Okay, I can now add 10 different styles here. Font size 100 and padding 20 and margin 100 and color green. I can add the styles in one place and they are populated in here as well, here as well. If I now open this specific page, here you will see hi there too. Very big font size, green color, red color. Same style associated in two places. That is what class lets you do. I can create a third div. And I don't have to rewrite all these styles inline again. I can just attach the class container to this specific div and I'm good to go. 1, 2, 3 I have now. This is great. This is the use case of classes. But I said I want to discuss two things, classes and IDs. By the way, if you want to code this, I'm happy to wait here for 30 seconds. Also happy to paste this code in chat, although I think it's a little hard to copy code from chat. But let's see, if you select it, right click and copy, you should be able to copy it. So if you want to try it, feel free to have pasted it in chat. I'm happy to wait for 30 seconds here. Just try to marinate the code. Let me open the code on the left and the browser on the right. Background color red, red color here, font size 100, very big font here. I can actually right click, inspect, and see all the styles here if I want to. Background color red, font size 100, padding 20, so on and so forth. It clearly says also it comes from the container class. So class is a very commonly used primitive that you will use to style websites in this pre-2009, 2008 front-end era. Today, in React, there is a different way to do it. No one really remembers / uses classes and IDs. But before React came into the picture, this was the way to, create similar looking blocks of code by attaching class to them. Cool. Great. IDs are supposed to be unique. Similar to how you can attach a class to a specific div or a span or a button, whatever, you can also attach IDs. ID equal to container1, ID equal to container2. IDs are supposed to be unique. They are used to uniquely identify a div, a span, a button, whatever. There is a very big difference between a class and an ID. Here, a class, you can attach the same class to multiple elements. You generally avoid attaching the same ID to multiple elements. There is a reason it's called an ID. It is a unique identifier. This specific div has this ID, this specific div has this ID. And why is it used? It can be used for styling. I can actually, write container1 here, ID equal to container1. And rather than adding a dot container here, I can add a slash container1. And if I go here, I see the same thing, which means if you attach an ID, you can actually put a specific style to it separately. But what do you have to avoid? You have to avoid this, having two containers with the same ID. Can you do it? Yes, you can. JavaScript won't really, error out, or you won't see an error. It's still rendering, but should you do it? No, it's a bad practice to have the same ID for separate elements. The question to have at this point is, Harkirat, if you cannot attach the same ID to different elements, why do you even need an ID? Isn't class name enough, or isn't class enough? That's a great question. Why are IDs useful? Classes let you get rid of code repetition. What do IDs let you do? They let you access elements via the DOM API. This is the first time I'm introducing DOM here. The DOM API lets you access various elements. Can you use IDs to do CSS? Yes, but what do you use IDs for usually? You use it in the you use it in your JavaScript code. You don't use it in CSS. How? We will see very soon. But what do IDs let you do? They let you access elements via the DOM API. What have I been repeating until now? Making websites dynamic is hard. Changing websites code dynamically is hard. If I have this code base right here, which renders something like this, adding an HTML element at the end is hard. That is the thing that's, hard to do, and DOM lets you do. So let's see how exactly DOM lets you, when I click on this button, add something to the end of the page. I'm going to write some code now. Would urge you to write along with me. Going to paste this specific current code that I'm on in the chat. Please paste this in your HTML file and write some code with me. Below the button, add a div, give it an ID, final sum /div. You've added an empty div at the end of your page. Save it, refresh it. Going to give you guys 10 seconds to do it. There we go. You have an empty div at the end of it. If I put a hi there here, you see hi there here. What do we want? We want, if someone puts a number here and puts a number here and clicks on this button, what should appear here? The sum of these two elements. This is where, unless you use some JavaScript, you cannot create a specific thing. I repeat, to make any website dynamic, you need to use JavaScript. Right now, I can write some. You can create a simple skeleton, a simple structure using HTML. But if you want to make it dynamic, add an element here, remove an element from here, you need to use JavaScript. More specifically, you need to use the DOM API that I've been talking about throughout. Let's see what that looks like. At the top of your file, right after HTML, introduce a script tag to write some JavaScript in it. This script tag is what lets you write JavaScript inside a page. We have seen this in the past as well, where I showed you a button on click equal to some function. And then I defined the function here at the top. Similarly, I have now written a script tag at the top of my file where I will define a function. Function populate div. Just define an empty function for now. and right next to your button tag, give it an on click. Yeah, by button on click, call the populate div function. This is what your final code should look like. Pasted it in chat as well. Select it all and then right click and then copy. That should let you copy it. Going to give you guys 10 seconds. Cool. Now, what should happen ideally if I refresh this page and if I've made sure that I've saved this file, Command S, then if I refresh this page, if I click on it, control should ideally be reaching here. I can actually confirm that by putting an alert here. If I write alert hi, if I refresh, click on this, I see an alert pop up. So which means this syntax is correct for calling a specific function whenever a button is clicked. Now, what do I need to do when this button is clicked? I need to add some text at the very bottom, right? Let's say I tell you, if the text that you have to add at the very bottom is hello world. No, it does not need to be the sum of these two. It just needs to be hello world. How will you do it? You might say, I will just put it here. Okay, I see hello world at the end. Yes, but I want you to add it dynamically, which means it needs to be empty initially. When the person comes to this page, it needs to be empty. When person clicks on a button is when hi there needs to appear here. This is the code you need to write. This is similar to when I come to LinkedIn. I see an initial page, but as I scroll, I get more data appended at the end, right? Similarly, when I'm here, when I click on a button, I want some data appended at the end. Specifically, I want hi there appended here. How will you do it? This is where you will use the global document variable that I've been talking about. This variable right here. What did I say a few slides ago? If this is the JavaScript spec, the browser gives you access to set timeout, fetch, set interval, and document. What is this document? It is a global variable using which you can manipulate the DOM. What is the DOM, Harkirat? Everything that you see here, if I click on right click, inspect, and go to elements, this is the DOM. The HTML that actually renders this specific thing on the screen is called the DOM, not specifically the HTML. Literally, all of these elements and you being able to access these elements, you being able to change these elements is what's called the DOM. Okay, you can actually update the HTML dynamically, which is exactly what we want. We want to put hi there at the end of this. How will you do it? As I said, using the global document variable, what I will do is document dot get element by ID final sum. Just try to log this. Log document dot get element by ID final sum. So console dot log of this thing, or you can be like const element equal to this, and then console.log element. Okay. Going to give you guys 10 seconds to do it. What we really want to see is what exactly is the DOM? What does it give access to? How does it let you make the page dynamic? Five more seconds. Okay. Now refresh the page and click on calculate sum. Click on it a few times. Right click, click on inspect. This specific thing opens up what's called the Chrome Developer Tools. And here, amongst many things, you will see something called the console. Click on it. Here, make sure you're on messages and keep clicking calculate sum. You will see more and more things getting logged. What happens when I hover over? What is this thing that got logged? Here, it looks like HTML. Yes, but it's not exactly HTML. It's a reference to that HTML. It's a DOM element. This is not just HTML. This is कि भाई this HTML currently on the DOM or currently on this website is what this variable has. You can actually change the contents here by calling a function on this element. This element has some wajud. It's not text. The type of element, if you render this, it won't be text. This const element isn't this div/div. It's not text. It is a DOM object. An object lets you access multiple functions on them. One of them is the function that we will use to change the contents of this div. Let's see that next really quickly so that we're able to reach somewhere. I said const element equal to this. I'm going to do element dot inner HTML equal to hello world. Pretty self-explanatory what's happening here. Element dot inner HTML equal to hello world. I just call this and see what happens on the right. If I refresh, click on calculate sum, I see hello world here. Has my website become dynamic suddenly? Yes. The initial render was this, and clicking on this renders something new here. That is what DOM lets you do. It lets you manipulate your HTML page using JavaScript. You have an initial structure of your website. That is great. But the fact that you can change that structure by clicking on a button is what JavaScript lets you do. That is what high-level DOM stands for. Is this much clear? Can we proceed? This was simple stuff. Iske baad to it's... I mean, this is high level. All we need to know now that there's just more HTML APIs we need to dive deeper into. Great. So 93%. Beautiful. Let's proceed. Let's say I ask you to log these values as inputs, the output. Okay. Let's do more stuff here now. Let's actually complete this assignment. If you were able to do this much, one more function of DOM you need to know so that you can actually finish this assignment end to end, which is put something here, click on calculate sum, something gets rendered here. The other thing you need to know is how can I access the internal value of this input box and this input box? If I have those values here, const A equal to value from the first one, const B equal to value from the second one, I can simply say element.innerHTML equal to A plus B, right? How can I get the current value that's here, current value that's here in this B variable? Similar to how we got this div's reference here, I can get this inputs reference here as well. I'm going to give it an ID equal to first number. I'm going to give the second one an ID equal to second number. And now what do I want? I want the current value in this input box in this A variable. I can say document dot get element by ID first number dot what? For input boxes, if you want the internal value of it, you have to log dot value. And same for B. I can be like document dot get element by ID second number dot value, which is this thing. If I save this, if I refresh the page, most probably it won't work. 1 plus 1 equal to 2, but it gives me 11 because string plus string actually appends in JavaScript. If I do one plus one in JavaScript, it's actually 11. I need to convert the string into number first. And there are multiple ways to do it. One of the ways is I can be like parse int of A plus parse int of B. Parse int is a global function that converts a string into a number. So if you give it the input of 1111, it will convert it into the number 1111. That way, parse int of 1, the string, plus parse int of 1, the string would be 2. Now, if I refresh the page, put 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here, Click on calculate sum. It is still incorrect because I've probably not saved 123, 123, 246. What extra did I introduce since the last slide? It is still getting document.getElement by ID second number. But what is it trying to access? The value. Because if you want the internal value of an input box, this is how you access it. Harkirat, how would have I known it? You would have Googled it. How to get internal value of input box HTML. You would have Googled it. And the first result itself says document.getElement by ID, the ID dot value. So dot value is how you access the internal thing. Dot inner HTML is how you put a certain thing inside a div. Cool. Take a pause, take a breather. Let me justify this and post the gist in chat. So you can try this locally. But we have effectively created a dynamic website now, and we had to use JavaScript to do it. We couldn't have done this thing using only HTML. Here is a gist. Feel free to open it, copy it locally, paste it, and try it out. I'm going to take a, let's say, 9-minute break. We'll restart at 7:55, where we will connect this to a backend. The backend I've already created, but we'll understand how LinkedIn actually works, like what exactly happens when you keep scrolling down. There is a backend request that goes out. How does it go out is what we'll discuss next. But until that, happy to open chat. We don't have the Q&A system yet, so any specific questions until now? Let me do a poll first. Actually, is this part also clear? Are we good? Again, we will restart at 7:55, maybe at 8. So we'll restart at 8. If you want to go to mess, this is the perfect time to do it. Just going to answer a few questions. If you're in college, you want to go to mess, this is the perfect time. Quick poll. Beautiful. 95%. So any questions high level at this point? We will restart at 8. So feel free to take a break. Send PPT. Okay, let me upload the PPT somewhere. No questions. Great, great, great. Simple stuff. Browser.js. If browser.js provides document, then why does JS in VS Code not give error for document? Does JS know about document? Yeah, so browser VS Code knows that you're writing JavaScript code for the browser, which is why it understands, there is a document type here, which is why it does not give an error. Can we manipulate the DOM with other languages other than JS? Your browser only understands HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Amongst these, JavaScript is the only language you can use to manipulate the DOM. Topics for the next 2 weeks, we'll start React probably next week, and some SQL and MongoDB in one deeper dive. That's it. Instead of on-click, we can also use click event handler for a button, which would be better approach. No idea. I mean, Google it, but whatever works. I just use on-click. I never knew there was a click handler. Why do you need a function and a button to modify the DOM? Can we do it without the function, and how? Yes, you can. You can actually do it without the function. That's a good side exercise to do. Okay, bhai, anytime these button changes, the output should appear here. No need to click on a button. For that, you need to basically listen to any change on these elements. So again, I would Google at this point, okay, how to listen to, how to attach an event to input box change. There you go, on change. Input, there we go, on change. So what I would do is this. I would say no need for button. Input 1 on change equal to populate div. Input 2 on change equal to populate div. Now if I refresh, if I put something here, put something here. Maybe something else, maybe not on change. On change isn't triggering immediately after I change it for some reason. It is triggering after I click outside. I'm sure there's a different sort of function you can put here. We'll figure it out. Something like this only. I'm sure someone will paste in chat very soon. Why not just use type number? So whenever you do a document dot get element by ID something dot value, it will give you back a string only. And then you have to, somehow pass it. When you say why not use type number, what do you mean? You mean another way to convert the string into a number? What do you mean? Why don't I get access to a number here directly? And that's just the browser API. Browser will always return you a string whenever you do a dot value. If a browser is JS document, then why JS VS Code? Okay, I answered that. Harkeet, I'm working with, okay, so off topic question, going to ignore. Everyone use React and why to learn DOM. So we have a foundation for React. That's the only reason, no other reason. There is some static in mic. Is this better? I can actually just hold it for a while. Whenever I'm not typing. It's probably better, hopefully better. Sir, what is the difference between normal function and async function? So slightly off topic here, but generally a function should be async, and we've covered this a few times in past classes, but a function should be async if it returns a promise, or if you're trying to await inside, which effectively means it is still returning a promise only. So if I ever put something like this, return new promise, actually in this case it doesn't need to be async here, but you would technically still say this is an async function if it returns a promise, or if you ever have to await another function here, then you will say this function is an async function. Generally, the definition is if it returns a promise, it is an async function. How does JS work without semicolons most of the time? It's just how JS works. It's just how it was written. And people did not care. Yeah, it's just loosely typed. All right, a few more questions. ChatGPT explains it differently. Set timeout is part of the JavaScript language, but not the browser. It's just a built-in function that is commonly used in web development to schedule execution of a function after a specified time. The set timeout function is part of the web APIs, which are provided by the browser environment. Could you please clarify again? Yeah, so exactly, right? What is it saying? It is part of the JavaScript language. It is not exactly part of the JavaScript language. Let me ChatGPT in front of you. I could still totally be wrong, but 99% I think I'm right on this. Okay. Is set timeout part of the ECMAScript standard, or is it something browsers add extra on top? So here it says set timeout is not part of the ECMAScript standard itself. ECMAScript defines the core syntax of semantics in JavaScript language, but does not cover APIs specific to browsers or Node.js. Set timeout is provided by the web APIs in the browser. It is a method on the window interface, yada, yada, yada. So that's at a high level what I meant. Okay. It is not part of the ECMAScript standard. Is it enough what you have made us learn, explained us for backend? Or is there something more for backend? Oh, there's a bunch to do, right? So if you look at the syllabus, I mean, there's also implementation, ORMs, things like these, but like a bunch of things that we have to cover in backend. Basically, long way to go. Oh, Google slide for Laisha's video. I'll ask her. I don't have that yet, but I'll ask her. Send PPT. Okay. I haven't created one yet. Export PDF. Let me send it to Ruki, who will post it on Discord. All right, opening chat again. How depth should I study the basics of HTML, CSS? How much skill? I mean, this much is good enough. Whatever we're covering here is good enough. Can we specify HTML in an HTML value? Great question. Most probably not. Most probably it will just, override the text as HTML. So if I do something like this, Maybe you can actually. B other slash B. Yeah, you can. You can just pass in text like this. And as you can see, the bold tag actually gets rendered, which means, you can pass raw HTML as such here. There are actually better ways of doing it. We'll discuss that soon. Feel free to leave if this seems very easy, by the way. I didn't understood what is DOM. We are using DOM to get the element. Can you explain? Yeah, so DOM, so there are like a few definitions. High level, this thing that you see, right? This is the DOM. Okay, bhai, this element is this element is this. Let me try to access this element in here. How do I access it? Using this document variable. So any function that you're calling on document, any element that it returns back to you, for example, here, this element is a DOM element. This is not exactly HTML, something more. It lets you manipulate this by calling whatever, dot inner HTML. So technically, when I'm calling a function, I am using the DOM API. Basically means like I'm using the document API. And what is the DOM? Effectively this. Usually this elements tab is called the DOM. They're like more technical definitions. It's a tree based. If you can see, this looks like a tree, right? There's a top level node called HTML, which has two children. It has a head child, has a body child. So it's like a node which has two children. And then the second children has a bunch of like 7 children. So it's technically like a tree based representation of your page, and you being able to access them and manipulate them is what's called the DOM API. ParseInt versus unary plus for converting strings to number. Any difference? I prefer unary plus. Either works. Probably there's some performance benefit of one over the other. ParseInt is what I use. I haven't even heard of the second one, if I'm being honest. Unary plus, unless you've unary plus, no idea what that is. But if it works, it works. Use on input. Oh, okay. Let's try that. On input. There you go. So that's the way to do it. If you want to do it without a button, just say input on input, call this function. And then now, as I add the buttons, they keep on getting added one by one. Cool. Why onClick function is not a callback function like this one? Well, why does it need to be a callback function? What is the purpose of a callback function? Okay, you call a function which calls back a function of yours. But in our case, it's just ki by anytime a button is clicked, call that function. Under the hood, actually, it might be a callback function. But high level, I think you're worried about the syntax here. Why like this or populate div? Okay, your question is, Harkirat, why aren't we doing this? Why did I actually have to call the function? That is just the syntax. As we move to React, you will see you won't have to do it. But here, if you just do this, it will not work. It will not call populate div unless you have explicitly called it in the whatever, on input, on click, on change, whatever. If I refresh now, put something here, the function does not run. Just the syntax that is expected. You are supposed to call it. Android, I'm adding as time goes by. Give me some time. I'll try to put at least the first 5 weeks in the next day or two. All right. Which is better, query selector or document variety, and why? Does it depend on the use case? Not really, just use query selector if you understand the syntax. So another thing, another way you can get the, DOM element is something like this. Selector, hashtag or whatever, dot. Maybe hashtag. Very cool. So you can also do something like this. Give query selector is basically I will try to get an element. And these are the details of the element. Hashtag something means something with this ID. And then dot something means something with this class. And then you can also be like, query selector div. I think that will give you all the, just one div. If you do this, if you do a query selector all, it will give you an array of all the divs. So you can do like, there are more fancy ways to get document.get element by ID is just the simplest one. Again, in the end, as we move to React, we will not be using any one of these, but this is a good one to know. Document.query selector. If you put in a div, it gives you just one div. If you do a query selector all with a div, it gives you back an array of all the divs in your specific document, which we just have one right now. Cool. 8 p.m. Let's proceed. Let's get into slightly complicated CAD territory now. Let's try to maybe one more thing I want to introduce, which is like not really needed, is document.get elements by class name. Here you give a specific class, it gives you all the elements which have that specific class name or like that specific class. For example, if I say the first input has a class associated with it, this mic is super irritating. Sorry, guys. Class equal to inputs. Then another one. If I refresh, I can do a document.get elements by class name, inputs, and it gives me an array of 2 inputs. I can do 0, it gives me the first input, and that way you can access all the elements that have a specific class name. Cool. All right, guys. Let's proceed. We completed this assignment. Hopefully it was clear. I've pasted a gist in the chat as well. Now, let's say you don't have access to the calculation logic on the front end. Let's assume it's a hard problem that someone has exposed on a backend server and you need to hit the backend server to get back the value. Do you understand this bit? Many times I've said, okay, bhai, what is ChatGPT? What is any website that you see out there? It is a front end talking to a backend because backend has some logic that has been written that they don't want exposed to the world. One good example here is ChatGPT. Okay, the founders or whoever the maintainers of ChatGPT have written a model. Ideally, they could just send that model to your front end, right? Ye lo JavaScript mein, there is your JavaScript code that can calculate an output based on your input. But they want to keep it to themselves. Also, running a model is really expensive, which is why they want to do it on their own servers. They don't want to give that code to someone to run on their browsers. For that reason, the ChatGPT like model code or whatever is not a function here. It is actually an express server or whatever HTTP server running, and you have to hit that server with some inputs, get back an output, and that is how your output gets rendered on the screen. Let's say okay, this calculation is also a very expensive calculation, adding two numbers. And let's say this has been exposed by the backend by someone, and you have to use that backend and render it here. You are not allowed to run this logic here. How would you do it? So what was the problem statement again? Now let's say you don't have access to the calculation logic on the front end. What do I mean by calculation logic? Basically just the sum function, or a plus b. You don't know that's how you calculate sum. You're a dumb person who can't write that logic. Let's assume it's a hard problem to solve and is exposed on a backend server. You need to hit the backend server and get back the value. So you need to give two inputs, like 100, 200, whatever those numbers might be, and get back an output that the browser then needs to render. How would you do it? I've already created a server for this, which is deployed currently on some-server.100x.com. Going to paste this in chat. So you can actually hit this specific endpoint, try to change these query parameters A and B, and you will see the output changes. So if I go back here to the browser, and if I paste this, you see it gives me 3. If I give it input 1 and 2, if I give it input 2001, it gives me back 2001. That is the sum of A and B. This code is actually on GitHub. You can look at it if you want. It's a very simple Express server. I'm sure you guys can create it yourself. It looks something like this. So here, as you can see, I've exposed two endpoints. Ignore the endpoint below. The first one, what do I say? Const a equal to rec.query.a. Get the query parameter that has a as the identifier, and then b as the second one. And then I calculate the sum, and then I return that back to the front end, which is why you see this. Notice I don't return it back in JSON format. I simply return it in a textual format back to the front end. Now we need to change the code here to hit this endpoint and actually get back the response. I want to do a quick poll. Can you already do this? Do you already know how to do this? Yes or no? Can you already do this? Yes or no? Okay. 60/40. So great. That means this assignment is useful then. So let's try to do this. What do I have to do? I have to hit a backend server. Let me revert the code firstly. Let me revert it back to when a button is clicked. There we go. So this is the code base currently. I have a button clicking on which this gets populated. If I go here and check it out, I put 3, 4 here, 4 here, click on calculate sum, 8 gets rendered. Now the constraints are okay, you can get the value here, that is fine. You can get the value here, that is fine. You can get the element, that is fine. You are not allowed to do this. You have to hit a backend server, get back the response. Once you get the response, you have to put it here. Okay? So I can't simply do this directly. Let me comment this out. Okay. How do I send a request to the backend? Do you guys remember the fetch function that we discussed in the last class? Okay. Browsers give you access to 10 different things other than the JavaScript spec. Set timeout, set interval, fetch. What was fetch? It was a function to which if you give some inputs, okay, bhai, this is the endpoint I have to hit, this is the method I have to hit with, these are the query parameters, it gives you back a response. Yeah, bhai, the backend returned this response. Can you use the fetch function here? Can I be like fetch and then hit the specific endpoint that is already exposed by someone on the internet? This code that you saw on GitHub, I actually deployed it before the class on some-server.100xdevs.com. So anyone on the internet can hit it. You can hit it as well. We need to silently hit it in the background. Similar to when I'm on chat.openai.com and I type something here, click on a button, a silent request goes out. What do I mean by silent? I mean कि भाई, I did not have to refresh the page or anything. In the background, a request went out to a ChatGPT server, response came back, response got rendered here. Similarly, can I be like, कि भैया fetch, I'm going to send you some inputs here where A, I need to replace this here. So let me replace this with whatever my real A is, and then same for B. There are cleaner ways to do it. I'm going to do it the dumb way, and then eventually we will see a cleaner way to do it. This is a slightly ugly way of doing it. Fetch question mark A equal to this A variable from the top and B equal to this B variable from the top. This should at least send the request. We haven't yet gotten the response, done anything with it, but let's see, is our request going out? If I save this, feel free to copy it. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds. Haven't done much, just got access to A and B and then send the fetch request. I don't even need this line for now. So I'm going to comment this out as well. 10 more seconds. All right. Let's go back here, refresh, click on calculate sum, go to network tab. Oh, shoot. You will see a bunch of errors. So here we have to introduce cost to the backend. So give me a second here, guys. Shouldn't take more than a second. Basically, something is up to the backend, so I need to fix the backend. Until then, at least try to see is a request going out on your side? Do you see a request go out to some server? The response is not coming back for some reason. You see something called the CORS error here. But is the request going out? Just try to make sure you're able to reach here until I fix the backend. All right, sorry about that. The backend is fixed. How I fixed it, we would see eventually. But now, let me save this. And now try to rerun the code locally. And if I click put 4 here and maybe 5 here, click on calculate sum, I see a request goes out. And the backend is down again. Sorry, guys. All systems down. Something is up with the backend. All right, let's quickly try to test this while the backend is up. So this is our code. If I click on calculate sum, a request is going out and I'm getting back 9. So my front end is at least able to hit the backend. What was the problem until now? The backend was down. I've brought the backend up again. This is my code. And what does it do? Anytime the button is clicked, I get the value of A and B in the current input boxes and I send a request. Question is, how do I get back the response in a variable so I can put it here in the final sum div? For that, before that, fetch is an asynchronous call. Do you guys get why that is? Why fetch needs to be an asynchronous call? Where is this code running on my Mac machine? Where is the current backend running? As you saw, I opened the terminal and did a bunch of things here. What does it say? Ubuntu at some IP. This is some server in Mumbai, not in Delhi, where I'm currently. So this request needs to go out from my machine over to a machine in Bombay, and then the response needs to come back. So this call ideally needs to be an asynchronous call. If I actually do something like this, you will see rest that is logged is actually a promise, as it should be, because it takes time for a call to go out to a server in Mumbai. If I look at the logs, it says promise pending. And what do we do whenever we are dealing with promises? We add a dot then at the end. When the promise resolves, when we get back the data, is when we need to do something with the final data. So how do we deal with this fetch? How do we get the final response? Something like this. I say fetch whenever you resolve, then control should reach here, and I log a response object here. If I look at the response object now, it's still some very big response object. It's still not, 8, which it should be. 4 plus 4 equal to 8. I still don't see 8 here. Why? This again is the fetch API syntax. Okay, by this, the fetch API is like very archaic, very old. If you use a new library today like Axios, you will see the syntax is much easier to send a request to a backend. But for fetch, it is by first you call fetch on the specific URL, then you get back a response. Once you have the response, you have to know is the response simple text? Is the response JSON? Is the response binary? In our case, what is the response? The response is simple text. If I know that, then you have to do something like this. You have to call response dot text. And in the past, you might remember we called response.json in the last class when I was introducing fetch a bit, because we knew the data that we got back was JSON. Here we know that the data that we're getting back is textual data. Unfortunately, even this is a promise. You might ask, Harkirat, why? When you already know data has come back, why should response.text be an asynchronous function? Why is this returning a promise? This should just be like immediately getting back. It should be something like this. Why did I have to await response.text? It's just how the fetch function is written, or the fetch, whoever has written this library has written. Okay, bhai, when you tell me whether or not you want text or JSON or whatever, I will do an asynchronous call. I need to figure something out. What that is on me. So you have to await me. If you simply try to do this, you will get back a promise here. If you want the actual data, then wait. And whenever I resolve is when you get the access to the final data. Now, if I save this, refresh and put two numbers here, click on calculate sum, 8 gets logged, which means finally I have access to whatever the backend responded back with. And now what do I have to do here? Hopefully this is straightforward. I just have to do this. I have to say when I have answer, document or get element by ID, final sum dot HTML equal to answer. Now if I refresh this, I add 4 here, click on calculate sum, 8 comes here. And I did not write the logic on the front end. I sent a request to a backend. Backend did the calculation. Backend responded back with 8. If you go to the network tab, you can see. And then I finally rendered 8 here. This is the code for it. Here, is there a cleaner way to do it? Yes, I can use the async await syntax, something like this. This function will do the exact same thing as this function. This is just the cleaner async await syntax to get to the same thing. Again, the question at this point might be, Harkirat, why am I awaiting response.text? Because it returns an asynchronous sort of response eventually. It does return a promise, which is why you have to await it. Why does it return a promise, Harkirat, when this seems like a local thing? Just how the maintainers of, or whoever wrote the fetch library wrote it. If you use Axios, you don't have to do it. You get access to response.data immediately if you use the Axios library, which is another external library that lets you do something similar, which is sending out a request to a backend. Cool. Use this or use this, the same thing would happen. In the end, we have a dynamic website connected to a backend. So basically, we have a full stack application. You have not written the backend, but as I showed you, the backend was fairly straightforward. App.get/sum, do two things, find the sum, return it. Good question to ask at this point is, why are we doing this on the server, Harkirat, when we know it's an easy computation to make that we can make on the front end? Because this is an easy computation, but as your application grows, you create a social network, you create a machine learning application, whatever, then most of your logic will be on the back end. Your browser's job, effectively, for any full stack application, the browser's job, or the front end code's job, is just to send out a bunch of backend requests and render whatever came on the front end. How do you send the backend requests? Like this. How do you render something new on the front end dynamically? Like this, using the DOM. Cool. That's a good checkpoint. Let's do a poll and then proceed. Iske baad, there's just a harder assignment to do after this. %83. So let's do the hard assignment. Very similar. And then whoever understands can leave. And then I'll take a doubt session at the end where I cover the things that might be confusing. Most probably, my guess is the confusion lies somewhere here. But happy to cover it after the last assignment for today, which is this right here. You have to build a simple UI for calculating the interest given a principal amount, an interest rate, and the number of years that you're holding this interest for. So whoever understands this, let me create a gist for this. Can you solve this problem yourself? कि हाँ, given a principal amount, let's say 1 lakh rupees, and a rate of interest, let's say 5%, and a duration, let's say 2 years, and a backend that gives you the answer to this as well, how to do this heavy computation, that given a principal, a rate, and a duration returns back the final total you might have and the interest that you have gained in those 2 years, let's say. If there is a backend that does all this computation for you, can you create a front end for it where you have to put 3 inputs, an input for a principal amount, could be 1 lakh, could be 10 lakh, a rate of interest, which could be anything between 1 to 100 or 0 to 100, and the time, which is the number of years that you're trying to hold this specific investment for, and that that the backend returns you this. Can you print this on the front end in a pretty fashion? You will have access to whatever 1,10,000 rupees with a total interest of 10 lakh rupees or 10,000 rupees in a span of 2 years. Can you do this yourself? If you understand the first part, I'm assuming this part is straightforward. Can you do this yourself? Yes or no? This was one of the original assignments in our, orientation class. All right, great. So if you can do this yourself, 86% still. तो वही है, जिनको वो नहीं समझा उनको नहीं समझा. Cool. All right. Then let's discuss one more thing before we end it, called throttling or debouncing. I did not have this, but since the class is a little early, it's a good enough concept to know. Debouncing or throttling. How many of you already know this, what this is, and why this is used for? This will be slightly tricky, by the way, but ठीक है. If you bear with me, you'll be able to understand it. Okay, most people don't know it. Great. So look at our front end here. What am I doing? Anytime I change a number here, is the request going out? Look at the network tab. Save, refresh, one. What am I missing? Oh, I have to click on calculate sum. Okay. Changing the problem statement a bit. You now don't need to have the calculate sum button. Anytime someone types something here or types something here, the request should go out automatically. Something that someone asked a few minutes ago. So firstly, get rid of the button. And secondly, anytime either this input changes or this input changes, you need to send the request and get back the response. By the way, if you already know throttling, then feel free to leave, or debouncing. This is not much to do here. So now I got rid of the button. If I refresh, there's no button. If someone puts an input here or here, the request needs to go out to the backend and get back a response. So how will I do this? I shared a few minutes ago. If you were on the break, you might not have seen it, which was on input is another function that you have access to this on this input variable or like input element. And what I can say is any time an input changes, which means someone puts something here or puts something here or changes the value here, call this populate div function. You can call this one or this one, either one. Both do the same thing. I'm going to save this. If I refresh, and now if I change input in the first one, you will see a request goes out. Change input in the second one, a request goes out. Third one, request goes out. This is great. This is exactly what we wanted, right? We have no button. Anytime something changes, we send a request to the backend responds back with something. We have a very nice full stack application. But what is the problem here? The problem is, if I know my input is going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, how many requests are going out? 6 requests are going out. How many requests should have been gone out? Only one. I knew my input are 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. But while I was typing it, one request went out for that. 2, one request went out for that. 3, one request went out for that. How can I optimize this slightly so that, I don't send out 6 requests? One way to do it, Akirat, you can just copy 1, 2, 3 separately and then just paste it together. That way, only one request went out, Harkirat. So you have been able to save 2 extra backend calls. Yes, but a real user won't do it. If you ever go to whatever, google.com, Google is not a good example. Amazon maybe is a good example. If I go to amazon.in and as you can see, if I type whatever I type, you see suggestions, which means anytime I type something, a backend request is going out and getting back whatever is the closest to, whatever I'm trying to search. If I type together too many things, you will see the request goes out at the very end. They are somehow able to debounce, which means not send the request immediately. They know Harkirat is typing really quickly. Let him complete. Let him finish the whole thing. Camera. If I type camera, maybe it does not send the request on CAM. It waits. Okay, let him finish. And then I will send the request. This is what is called debouncing, which basically means okay, you don't send out request immediately when you have a use case like this where the user will slowly add inputs and you want to wait somewhere till the very end. If the user hasn't typed for over 100 milliseconds is when you want to send out the request. Does that make sense? If the user hasn't typed for 100 milliseconds, it means that chalo, there is a break. I can now send out the request. The user is finally breathing and maybe this was the final input the user wanted to send. Is the problem statement clear? Do we understand why we need debouncing or delayed sending out of requests? Great. 91%. Again, happy to take doubts for the people who don't understand. How would you implement this? This is a standard interview question, by the way. Okay. Implement debouncing where you have 2 input boxes like these. Kaise karoge? Can you think of it? How would you debounce the populate div function? There are a few ways. Let's talk about the most raw one, the one that bhai, you don't have access to any external library. You have to do it yourself. How would you do it? This is how I would do it. Let's get rid of one of these functions. Let's get rid of the either one works. I'll get rid of this one. What I will do is I will define another function called debounced populate div. And this guy's purposes or goal is कि भाई, you are supposed to call populate div 100 milliseconds tak if you have not been called. I repeat, this guy has to call this guy if this guy hasn't been called for 100 milliseconds. If this guy gets called at least once, then this guy doesn't need to call this immediately. It needs to wait for 100 milliseconds. And if it does not again get called for 100 milliseconds, is when it will actually call populate div. Does that make sense? If I replace this function call to populate div with the debounced populate div, what does this guy need to do? This guy needs to be like, okay, call happened to me. I will wait for 100 milliseconds. If I don't get called again in 100 milliseconds, I will call populate div. But if I do get called in 100 milliseconds, then I will wait for more 100 milliseconds. And only if, it has to delay the call to this. Delay the call to populate div until I've not been called for 100 milliseconds. And I have been called at least once or so. So क्या करना होगा? It needs to be like, by any time I am called, I am going to start a clock for 100 milliseconds and call populate div. This is almost good. This is like pretty close to our solution, not exactly there. This is a good start though. Let's see what this function would do. If I just add a set timeout, if I just delay calling populate diff for 100 milliseconds, let's see what the front end looks like. If I open the network tab, put something here, you will see this request is going out, but after some 100 milliseconds, it's very difficult for the naked eye to see. But if I make this, 1 second, then you will be able to see. I send, and after 1 second, the request went out. I put something, and after 1 second, the request went out. This is a good start. But what's missing? What's missing is, okay, if during these 100 milliseconds, again this thing got called, then close this timer and start a new timer. I repeat, if this got called once, start this clock. But if this got called again, while this clock is running, stop the original clock and restart a new clock. If we do that, are we able to debounce this call? Sounds like it. Question is, how do you cancel a clock? Just how set timeout lets you create a clock, there is another function called clear timeout that lets you clear a clock. Question is, how does it do it? Like this. If I ever do const timeout equal to set timeout, this actually returns you back a number. And if I call clear timeout with that number, the clock gets cancelled. Calling a clear count, unless the clock is already executed, in which case you can't do anything. But if the clock hasn't yet executed and you call clear timeout with whatever number the set timeout returned you, then the clock will stop. Basically what happens is, if you go to Lupe, whenever the clock reaches here, right, the clock has a specific ID. And while this clock is running, if you call clear timeout, the clock basically gets, rejected. We don't need this clock. So basically, if I do something like this, let x equal to this, and then clear timeout x. Here, so Lupe doesn't take this into consideration, which is why you're still seeing this. Yeah. But in the real world, so this whoever wrote this website did not write the logic to remove the clock from here whenever clear timeout gets called. But in the real world, if you create a clock and you call clear timeout with whatever is the ID of your clock, the clock stops right there. We can actually confirm this. So I've written this, I create a clock, immediately clear it. Now if I go here and if I put whatever number here, you will see no requests are going out. Why? Because a clock gets created, immediately gets cleared. What do we have to do? We have to do, okay, bhaiya, clock gets created. And if there is another call to this function, then old clock gets deleted, new clock starts. Is this part clear? What do we have to do to debounce this function? इतनी math अपने clear है या this is too much math? Not clear. Okay. कोई चक्कर नहीं. Excel draw. So whoever understands this, finish this. There's not much left here. There's like one more line you have to add and you have a debounced populative. For people who don't understand, debounced. This is one function. The goal of this function is to call another function, which is the main function. This function. This guy needs to call this guy if this guy gets called and it has been 100 milliseconds and this guy hasn't been called. What happens when I go to Amazon.com and try to search? If I put something here, let's say A, it can immediately send a backend request, or it can be like, let Harkirat cook, let Harkirat type whatever he wants. And whenever he stops typing, 100 milliseconds after that, I will send the request. If he starts typing again within 100 milliseconds, means he's still typing. So let him type. I will not, keep sending requests every 100 milliseconds. That is what Amazon does here. If I type, and time between each click is less than 100 milliseconds, Amazon will defer sending the call. But if this happens very quickly, if it doesn't happen very quickly, if I type AMA, then it's like, okay, it's been 100 milliseconds. Let me send a backend request while Harkiyat thinks of the next letter. Or, maybe he has finished writing this specific sentence. So it's the right time to send the request. We have to implement same thing here. Okay, bhai, anytime input is changing on this website, anytime input is changing, this function is getting called. This function needs to make sure, okay, bhai, if I get called again in 100 milliseconds, then I will not call populative. But if I don't get called in 100 milliseconds, then I will call populative. It means Harkiyat has either stopped typing or he is thinking. So meanwhile, let me send the request. That is what this guy has to do. Is this thing clear? Ke what debounced populative have to do? The logic we will get to. But do we understand how we are trying to implement debouncing? Okay, that we understand. Question is, how does this function do it? Here's what I say. Anytime you get called, create a clock and start it for 100 milliseconds. If you get called again, clear the old clock and start a new clock. So what if I do something like this? I say, let timeout equal to null. No, whatever. Let timeout, which is an empty variable, I define. And any time debounced populate div gets called, I do a clear timeout, and start the new clock. What is this doing? Anytime this gets called, clear the old clock that was running, start the new clock. So if there was any clock that was running that was supposed to call populate div, stop that clock right here and then start a new clock for 100 milliseconds so that populate div gets called in 100 milliseconds. But if this gets called again, then the second clock gets cleared and then the third clock starts and so on and so forth. So this much is the logic to create the debounced version of any function. If we have created a generic function, just change the function that you've written here and you have the debounced version of something else. Cool. Let me save this. Let me show this in action and then happy to take doubts as well. Okay. Let me increase this by a little bit so that we can actually see it. This will happen very quickly. So let me increase the timeout to 1000 milliseconds. Now, if I go to my index.html, if I refresh, open the network tab, let me type 1, 1, 1, 2, 2. I'm keep typing. I'm not stopping. Stop for 1 second. Request went out. This is a slower version of it. Just to show it in action, I can actually decrease this to 100 milliseconds. But do you see how I've implemented debouncing? How I saved so many unnecessary calls to the backend by introducing debouncing to my front end? The logic might not be clear, Abhi, but do we understand what we were doing and how it was done and why this is needed to, minimize the number of backend requests? Do we understand why this was needed? Great. We understand that much. Question is logic. How does this actually do that? I mean, it's like just 4 lines of code if I'm being honest. So if you look at it, I mean, there are some edge cases here. Okay? Initially, timeout is undefined. So the first time this is called, clear timeout will be called with undefined, which it just ignores it. Nothing will happen. No clock is there with the ID undefined. Nothing will happen. And then the first clock starts. And then if nothing gets called for, let's say, 20 seconds, and then again this gets called, clear timeout gets called with a clock that has already expired, which is fine, right? It will still ignore the call. Unless this call happens very frequently in like, a span of a second. In that case, we are actually clearing clocks and creating new clocks, clearing clocks, creating new clocks. And that is how we're debouncing the call, basically delaying the call until we have a breather for a second. That's what we want, right? Someone's typing really quickly, let them type. We are not going to do anything. If we have a breather of 1 second, is when we send the request. And if you look at the logic, what does it say? First time the controller is here, create a clock. If we got a breather of 1 second and this function was not called for 1 second, call populative. But if we did not get a breather for 1 second, if this got called again, clear the old clock, create a new clock. If it got called again, clear the old clock, clear a new clock. Keep going until the last clock has not been cleared for a second and then call populative. In the real world, this timeout will be much smaller. But do we understand the logic now of how to debounce? Okay, great. Beautiful. Would urge you to write this locally. And then would also, as you guys said, most of you said you'll be able to, do the assignment for today, which was this one. Try to do this as well. And if you can, then just write the backends yourself as well. Don't look at my backend. Write the backend yourself as well. That's it. We're done for today. That was pretty much high level of what we wanted to cover. If today is clear with the good probability, like good percentage is 95%, it means tomorrow we can almost surely start reconcilers. So let's do that tomorrow. Let's do a little bit of Chrome developer tools and reconcilers, just creating some intuition for React. And then next week onwards, we can get into React. There'll be a bunch of offline videos next week on two things. Number one, GSOC, and number two, databases like Mongo and maybe even SQL. There won't be, I'm assuming you don't need an offline video for, what we've covered today. Today's bit was easy. So hopefully. So next week, the offline videos will be on databases and GSOC only. And let's try to stick to that because, GSOC is right around the corner. That's all for today. Now I'm opening the chat for any questions. The class has officially ended and slides are present. Any more questions? First doubts and then other questions. But any doubts from today's class? Lots of them. We'll start from the top. Can you explain why we are using response.txt? Great question. So let's go back to the code. Someone wrote the fetch library. They said, you take these inputs, give me back, I will give you back a response object. And they said, I will not tell you, whether the backend was, I don't know whether the backend returned you simple text like this, or it returned you JSON, or it returned you binary data, or it returned you a video, or it returned your image. I don't know. You tell me, once you have access to response, you tell me, has the backend returned simple text to you, which is like basically, hi there, hello, simple string, or has the backend returned JSON to you? For that, you will have to do something like this. Or has it returned binary to you, some other sort of data to you? You tell me. And when you call, that specific thing, I will take whatever I got from this function call and return you back the data in that specific format. Now the specific format is text. First you tell me, and then I will give you access to the final textual answer. If that is JSON, you tell me, they will give you access to final JSON answer, so on and so on. Again, I would urge you to look at Axios, which is a library that is a wrapper on top of Fetch that makes all of this very simple. You can simply call something like this. If you use Axios, the syntax will look like this. You will have access to your JSON, your whatever data directly here. Axios makes this much easier. If this feels confusing, it's because this is confusing written by, the bare bottom level, lowest level API. This is. People have created wrappers on top to make the syntax slightly easier to understand. What is that method was post for fetch API. It was a get method. If you don't specify anything in fetch, it assumes it is a get. If you want to specify, you can specify method, whatever, post. But since we did not specify anything, by default, it is get. And if you go to the backend code, you will see I have created get handlers. Now that React introduced, what are the use cases wherein we need DOM? Under the hood, React is doing DOM manipulation only. So even if you as the end developer don't need to understand DOM APIs, React under the hood is doing that only. It is calling a bunch of document.create element, document.remove element, document.inner HTML, things like these. You as the developer of React don't see it because the syntax is very simply created for you. So do we need this ever? No, a little bit sometimes. The React has something called refs that give you access to the exact element if you ever need to update the
exact element like we had to here. There are some use cases in which you have to do it. For example, I discussed this in my live stream. Whenever you're creating a chat system, it's usually a good idea to not store it in React state, but directly update the DOM elements like we've been doing here. So if we're in Zoom chat right now and a bunch of chats are coming, we are just appending a bunch of things here. That's a better way to do it, even if you're doing it in React. There are some use cases where you need DOM, but mostly no. You usually never call document.getElement by ID there. How was it clearing the timeout while it was called after set timeout? It does not clear it. It ignores it. If the clock has passed, if the clock has already done, it's done. It's not actually clearing the clock. Throttling. So throttling is the same thing on the backend. Okay, the backend can also be like, too many requests are coming from this person. I'm going to throttle them. I'm going to ignore 3 requests and only handle the 4th request. So if your backend does the same thing, then your backend is what's called throttling the front end. Okay, haan bhai, I get that you are trying to get the same thing again and again from me. So let me just ignore first 5 requests and I'll just respond to your 6th request. That's one sort of way you can use throttling. Throttling, if you want to go to the depths of, there are more, network level things that you can do in throttling. Your network starts to throttle requests, especially if you're using UDP. High level, this is just one. It's specifically for this use case. If you start to, ignore some requests on the backend, you can say you are throttling from the backend. Can we add headers to fetch if you requires auth? Yes, you can. So it's very simple. You just have to do something like this. Headers, and then whatever you want to put here, which could be authorization. Then put your mirror header here. Meetup in Delhi is happening. We will have one meetup in Delhi, one meetup in Bangalore, one meetup in Chandigarh. So we have 3 meetups exclusive, 99% exclusive. We'll open tickets for anyone who wants to come from outside the cohort, but we'll price it really heavily. So mostly it will be people from the cohort. Free for the people from the cohort. If anyone from outside the cohort wants to, it will be paid for them, if at all we open. What is the method? Okay, I answered that. How does the text slowly render in ChatGPT? Well, beautiful question. This is the question I was, dreading. कि हाँ ये कोई पूछेगा. So great question, sir. Okay, Harkirat, request response to happens once only. You typed something here, pressed enter. How is it slowly coming back? Can you slowly send back this response from your backend? Answer is no. You cannot do that, especially in HTTP. In fact, if you look at the request that goes out, let me press enter. Look at the response. It resolved. It resolved. This data is coming from somewhere else. And this response, it gave you back. Literally no response here. It just acknowledges, sends you empty data if at all. This is what I think is happening. Yep. The conversation request in which you actually sent it the message returns literally nothing. This data that you see, is most probably coming from a WebSocket layer. Let me actually confirm that. Or WebRTC layer. Let's see. WS. No WebSockets. Huh. It's not WebSockets. Is it WebRTC? Then 1 second. Is it WebSocket either? I have no idea how this is coming. It is definitely not coming via, it could be coming via HTTP now. Let's see. Type something here. This is something I haven't ever explored. It's not HTTP for sure. Our HTTP request returns nothing. This data is slowly flowing from somewhere else. Where is it flowing from? Does anyone already know? I would have hoped / assumed it was a WebSocket layer. But when I refresh this page, I see no WebSocket collections. Unless I'm missing something here and there is a WebSocket connection. Basically, no, I have no idea. But it's not HTTP for sure. You will never get, slow response like this incrementally from the backend using HTTP. HTTP responds immediately. Oh, when explain the fetch part again. Where using fetch, there was promise chaining. Why didn't you use return? That depends. If you want to use promise chaining, then you can use return. So if you look at the function, I could have done something like this. Okay, fetch. And then return response.text. And then run a dot thing over here. So this is promise chaining. Slightly cleaner syntax than what it was, because it's indented in one line, right? What you saw before, which was, I was not returning and doing a dot then here. This is classic example of callback hell. You're inundating more and more levels. That is bad.
I can totally return response.text here and then do something. But this is promise chaining. Generally, best idea to do is
use the async await syntax. You will always uglify the code by adding a bunch of dot thens. Usually the best way to do it is create an async function and then do a bunch of await calls here rather than using dot then everywhere. Can you send the backend link? It is, yes, it's in the slides. Let me see. The backend will keep going down, by the way. So it's running right now because it's running in a terminal. As soon as I close my machine, it's going to go down. So would urge you to not depend on my backend, maybe run it locally and then, replace the URL with localhost. But this is the current URL until it's running. There is a good chance it stops running right after the call because I will just close my machine and the backend is, not starting persistently, which is something I was hoping for. So try to run the backend locally. The code is on GitHub. It's at the top of my GitHub right now. In HTML, passing functions to onClick, we are executing the function with parentheses. But if we do the same in React, it does not work. There you have to do this. What's the difference? Great question. People realized that this syntax is slightly ugly. Backend is down, by the way, as you can see in my connection close. The backend will be down. Showing, what was the question? It was a good question. Where is it? Harman, yes, both are correct. Both give you the same thing. Just to the link to the hard assignment. Well, I haven't done the hard assignment yet. So once it is done, I'm happy to share it. Someone will Discord in Discord chat. It's very simple. If you know the first one, second one is much easier. I haven't implemented it right now. Yeah, there was a good question. Where did it go? Oh, what is the problem with sending unnecessary multiple backend requests? Why do you need to minimize it? It's just overwhelming your backend, right? Is there a need for it? Like every backend request is some extra internet you're consuming, some extra bandwidth you're sending. Backend has so much load. If this is a very big website like Amazon, like literally Amazon is a very big website, millions of people there. If they all are typing, and every type you're sending request to the backend, when you know it's an unnecessary request, you try to minimize unnecessary requests. You don't have to. It'll still work. But that's why it's an interview question. It's a good to have. You don't necessarily need it. It'll work without it as well. XHR is not important. No, even fetch is not important. Everyone uses Axio or something. Why do we listen to our own Express server without hosting it? How do we listen our own Express server without hosting it? Oh, so you can just create it locally. So yeah, run it locally, node index.js, and then replace this backend URL, which right now is, this very long URL. Replace it with http://localhost:3000 or wherever you have hosted it /some equals thing. So just host it locally. Only thing is when you host this locally, you'll have to add cost to it. So the code will change a bit. So maybe don't host it locally. You'll face issues. Or Google how to add costs. Just 2 lines of code you have to add. Go back to this video where I actually added costs to the backend. Look at how I added 2 lines of code. Add them in this code base that you see on GitHub. Then run it locally. Then point your backend to localhost:3000 or whatever 8080 wherever the app is running. Yeah, there was a good question that I missed. Yeah. In HTML part, so HTML may you do this on click, you actually call the thing. But when you do the same thing in React, you just give the function name. You don't actually call it. That's just how this is actually a real syntax, right? You don't really need to call it. You should actually just give the function name. But this is how these guys wrote it. Whoever wrote React, they wrote it in sense, you just give us the function name. Under the hood, we will, do whatever you want. Actually call the DOM elements, so on and so forth. Like actually convert it into something like this. But that's just how React is done. And that is why a lot of times people always get stuck here in React because they actually call the function here. But when you're in React and you're adding an on-click handler, you just have to give it the function name. Here you have to actually add parentheses. What is the efficient way of doing it? Through front end or back end? Front end is good enough. देखो backend में you can ignore. I mean, front end is the right way to do it. Backend में you do rate limiting or throttling in like very specific use cases. Most of the time, front end is great. If you have done on the front end, beautiful. Backend may you usually add. So there's a slight difference between throttling and rate limiting. Now that I think of it, throttling may you slowly respond back to requests. You don't actually reject them. I think that's the technical definition of throttling. Okay. You know, if you send someone sends you 100 requests, you are like, ठीक है भाई, आ गई. Let me respond with one, and then second, and then slowly third, and then after 5 seconds I'll respond to fourth request, and after 20 seconds I'll respond to fifth request. Once over. I think when you throttle, you actually respond back to every request. But when you rate limit, you start to reject a few requests. So high level, you do it on the front end. No one really does throttling on the back end, if I'm being honest. You honor most requests, or you do rate limiting. You don't usually do throttling unless for very specific, use cases like video, where, if you're sending video to someone, to a backend server, their throttling does happen. What is the need of debouncing? से start करते हैं. Someone asked, explain debouncing again and the need of debouncing. So need though should be straightforward. I mean, very intuitive at the very least. Okay, if you ever go to Amazon.in and you type something here, KUR, every time you're sending a backend request. So that, because you need all of these suggestions, right? These suggestions are coming from some backend. This KUR goes to a backend responds back with the list of similarly looking strings. Now you don't want, if the person is typing very fast, if I typed all of this, should I really send a request with just K and then KU and then KUR and then KUARTA, so on and so forth? No, I should just wait for the user to type completely. And then once the user hasn't typed for like 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds is when I should send the request to the backend. That is why you need debouncing. Okay, if the user is typing really quickly, let them type. And once the user has stopped typing is when you actually send the request. That's the need of debouncing. Code ke liye, try to go through the video again. I think if 94 to 95% of the class understands it, it's easier to understand. Maybe just try to go back to the video to, look at the syntax again, or try to Google a little bit. How is there any constant value of number of requests the server can handle same time before crashing? The developers assign hitting a backend server. Yeah, so there are like standard benchmarks on this. How much an Express server can handle in a second. It's like some, I don't know, 20,000 or 2 million totally forgot. But yes, will your server break is a good question. Most of your wires would break if you're, by which I mean, requests will get basically throttled. Okay? If a million people are sending a request to a single backend server at the same time, so what will happen is they will get queued one by one inside like the specific wire that's reaching the HTTP server. And then one by one they'll get delayed basically. But will your server bonk? Will your server ekdam phat jayega? Most probably. You cannot really break a server by sending it a billion requests. I think. Could I be wrong? Probably. I could be. But I think your network, your wire itself will, not be able to handle, and your wire will only slowly send the request to your backend server, and hence your backend server will not get overwhelmed. In terms of what is the number of requests someone can handle on a single backend server that's running a Node.js app, there's some benchmark out there that you can look at. And you just auto scale them. If you know a billion requests are going to come in a second, you start 1,000 machines and then you load balance load to all of them. How the second function call is reaching the previous call? Are the function calls independent or dependent? So they are independent, but if you look at it, there is a global variable timeout. I set the variable here. The global variable is getting updated, right? So the function calls aren't interconnected, but the timeout variable that you have access to here was set by the last function call, which is why you're able to clear the last clock. Debounce populate div inside do a while loop will be better. Here doing a while loop, why would that be better? Like, can you paste some code here? What is the problem with sending unnecessary backend? It's just, why do you have to minimize it? Just the backend. Why do you want to overrun the backend server? Why do you want to send out unnecessary requests? There's no reason, right? How do you make your own API and host it? Can we create our own API on GitHub and use it? Yeah, so this will be covered eventually, but at a high level, I have an AWS machine where I host it. So you'll have to rent a machine. There are also free ways of doing it now, which is why we'll get to it like in a few weeks. But immediate answer is rent a machine and deploy us over there. Sir, the gist and should we start making projects or wait for teaching React also? I mean, if you know React, start building project either way. If you don't know React, then wait for the React. But using this, what we've done today, don't try to create front-end projects. No one is creating front-end projects the way we have discussed today using DOM manipulation. How can you access the time variable before declaring? I have declared it right here. So I declared it globally, then I'm accessing it here. Last week was overwhelming even with the offline videos. तो ओजस्वी के लिए क्वेश्चन है फिर just the MongoDB bit or even middleware. So let me सबके लिए पूछ लेता हूँ. Do you guys understand at least middlewares and authentication? Yes or no? Not MongoDB, but JWTs and middlewares. Do you understand that? Yes or no? Okay. Little ही है ये. 80% इससे भी कम है थोड़ा. 75, even lesser. 73, 72. ठीक है जी. Do you understand middlewares? Forget authentication and JWT, but do you understand middlewares? That is slightly better. Still pretty bad. तो फिर तो डाउट सेशन लेना पड़ेगा यार अगले वीक. तो लेट्स डू अ डाउट सेशन ऑन middlewares, authentication, and databases next week. 80% understand, which is not the metric we're hoping for, at least 90%. So next week, let's do a doubt session purely on this. Today and tomorrow should be totally unrelated. So you'll be able to do these classes. And next week, let's do an extra class, live extra class on this. Okay? What if timeout is clear? Then the new request is made as time completed. What if timeout is cleared? Then the new request is made as time is completed. Kavan, I don't understand the question exactly. Are you saying it both happen at the same time? What happens then? Single-threaded JavaScript. So both won't happen at the same time. One will happen before the other. If this happens first, then the next clear timeout won't be able to do anything. If this happens first, then the clock will get cleared and this will not get called. So either of the two will always happen. Never will both happen at the same time, if that was your question. But who is using timeout variable? It auto starts set timeout without the timeout variable being called. This variable is a set timeout synchronously returns you an ID. This doesn't take 1 second to come here. Whenever you create a clock, run this. Whenever a clock is created here, the ID of the clock can immediately be returned, even though this is taking a long time, but the ID is immediately returned. Haan bhai, this is the ID of this clock. If you ever want to clear the clock, use this ID. You get back immediately, which is why you can clear it almost immediately. You don't have to wait for a second. How can we deploy our backend? I have a video from the last cohort I'm happy to put if you want to like go through that early, but again, it requires you to buy an AWS machine or rent an AWS. There are free tiers, so you can probably just, but there are a few things you have to learn there, like Nginx and backend servers. There's a video from last week. Just remind Rookie, just ping Rookie if you need it, and then I'll just post it in the ad hoc sessions. If browser JS provides document, then why JS in VS Code don't give error? Does JS know about document? Yeah, so that's the thing, right? If you go to VS Code and if I type document, if I hover over it, what does it say? Where document : document. VS Code does know that you're going to run this code in the browser, and it is telling you, okay, haan bhai, I know this, which is why it's not giving you an error. It does know this is browser JavaScript code that you're running. Difference between node list and HTML collection. Node list मुझे फिर भी आता है, HTML collection the first time I'm hearing about it. Happy to discuss it later on, but no idea about what an HTML collection is. React with TypeScript or React with JavaScript? What will you teach us? Initially, we will learn everything with JavaScript. Then immediately we will introduce TypeScript one day, then move over to TypeScript. Recap, please. Sure. High-level recap of today's class. What we have covered, what we are covering today or this week. What is DOM? Official definition. Will not ever need it. We understood JavaScript is an implementation of ECMAScript. More specifically, V8 is one such compiler that converts this code into zeros and ones. But browsers and Node.js give you something extra on top. And amongst these extra things, document is what we are interested in today. This global document variable that you get access to in the browser. What does this do is what we were interested in today. We said, let's create a simple application. We created it. The only new thing here was using IDs. We understood classes and IDs, but using IDs, we were able to put something here at the bottom, which is the first use case of DOM we discussed today. How can you use the DOM API to dynamically change the page? And then I said, now that you can do this dynamically, hit a backend server, get back some response, and then render that on the front end using the fetch API. And lastly, since this happened really quickly, I discussed debouncing a little bit. My question is, how does this thing know that the client has started typing something within a timestamp? Oh, well, when does this function get called? The question is, how does the clock know कि हाँ, someone started typing? What have I written? Input on input call this, which means anytime something has been typed in this input box, right here, anytime something has been typed in this input box, this function gets called. Debounced populated diff. If you look at it, I say input on input, debounced on populated diff. So this function gets called. And so that is how it knows if something has been typed and it's supposed to, start the debouncing logic. How do we listen to our own server without even hosting it? You can host it locally, or if you want to host it on the internet, then happy to release cohort 1's video, which we will discuss this. Why are we using debounce? What is the need of debounce? As I said, it's just to minimize the number of requests going to the backend for a use case like this where someone is typing. What is timeout here? Will it be in memory? Is it a function? Oh, it's this global variable. I can rename it whatever I want. Timeout 5, timeout 5, timeout 5. So it's just a function, variable name. You can name it whatever you want. Link to the Discord is in the app. Go to app.100steps.com, log in the credentials you'll be able to get in. Is debouncing only used within, no, could be used in any function that you want to debounce, which is, delay the execution of a function for a while. You will use debouncing there. What is the problem with sending another? Okay, answer that. Can debouncing help in saving API calls on scroll? If yes, how would it affect the server-side pagination, and can it result in loss of data for older page? No, you probably won't use debouncing while scrolling. This is a very there you when you scroll to a certain section, you send out a request, get the next set of posts or whatever. What is the response return in the sum? And what does answer have? What does the response return in the sum? What does answer have? Chandra, I don't understand your question. Sorry, could you elaborate? Give more context. If browser.js provided document, then why okay, answer that. What is the method? What if the method is post in the fetch API? Then you just add another argument here. And you will send a post request to the backend. Harman, yes, those both are the same and both are exact. Both are, oh, no, both are different. You have JSON above and you have text below. So they're different. But if you had text in both the places or JSON in both the places, then they would be the same. URL looks ugly. Is there a way to fix it? Yeah, you can send them in the body. You can be like, I don't need to send the URLs as query parameters, send them in the body, make it a post request that you can make cleaner. Const element equal to document get ID. Alkiyat, if we have a normal function, why do we need arrow function? Is it just to make syntax simpler? No, there are some use cases where it becomes, it depends on how this variable gets binded, which we can get to eventually. There is one specific case in which using an arrow function is better than just using a normal function. It's not for just prettiness, but most cases you can just use them interchangeably. I Googled it, but found there was a problem with this keyword. Exactly. Also, I'm going to video map filter. You could Google this. You explain it. Let me create a dedicated video on this where I show you the exact use case of how. Let me write that. I'll have to think of a very good use case here. Like there are use cases where you will immediately see why. Use this as any arrow function, show actual functionality in a video. Okay, why it is slightly better than using function. Slide link, it will be posted in Discord, or whenever I upload the video, I'll put it there as well. But I think Rookie might have posted in Discord already. What makes adding dynamic behavior website too hard? Is this statement just to build up signify the importance of inner HTML? No. What makes it hard is before there were dynamic websites, everyone would just write code like this, which is like some HTML code. Khatam. Finish. You save this, people come to your website, people see this. Finish. Page never changes. But in the real world, are websites like this? No. In the real world, if you go to any website, there is dynamic behavior, which means, something is new is coming here. 25 is becoming 26 automatically. More messages are coming here. And, as I scroll, more things are coming here. What does this mean? This means you have dynamic HTML. HTML is getting appended to your DOM, every few seconds. That is hard. That is why I said dynamic websites are hard, and that's the high level reason for it. Can you do the HTML part for a bit? What do you mean HTML part for? Oh, this part. There you go. There you go. Is throttling and debouncing? No, so throttling is different as I explained. Cool, easy. One set of questions done. Let's do one more set of questions. Opening chat. Debouncing was a throttling. Debouncing, that's happening, something happening on the front end. Throttling, something that happens on the back end. Debouncing, delaying the call, not actually calling 5 times and calling the 6th time. So, throttling, server responding back, but slowly. Throttling your request. Slowly responding back to your request. When I run my program Little Flame, I found the racing function only is the API. Callback, like Kalmadi done the job. Should it show the result to call? Web APIs only serve purpose of the clock. No, Web APIs do a bunch of things. The thing is, latent clock isn't optimized for every use case. Some code that someone has written that shows you some things that reach the Web API. Don't take that as a metric. Yeah. As you saw, I cleared the timeout. It was still, it showed the clock and went through the event loop, went back to the call stack. So don't take that as a metric. It's for some high level use cases, but it's not. It does not show everything in the Web API section, which should be part of the Web API section. I want to develop a POC, the flexibility module, which can be easily implemented using it. How can we do it? It does lit framework have any role with it? What is the lit framework? Can you help with a separate video reference? I don't understand your question, Sonali. I want to develop a POC to have a flexibility module. What is a flexibility module? Which can be easily implemented using React. How can we do it? You said it can be easily implemented using React. And then you said, how can we do it? Does lit framework have anything to do? I have no idea what the lit framework is. Your question is very vague. Could you elaborate maybe to one of your TAs? Can you explain or show code for throttling? Oh, so at Express, no one would do throttling. Throttling is more of a video concept where you're sending things like video to the backend. Conceptual wise, I understand debouncing by the server side, but okay. So let me think of it. There is no easy example that I have. Like you can't just put, just like we had rate limiting logic in the backend. There's no easy way to put like some throttling logic in the backend. So a high level, it will be difficult. It's more of a, when you're writing video code or WebRTC code, is when you tend to throttle video, especially if someone is on a lower video. High level, no easy example in Express. I don't even know why I introduced throttling today. It's like debouncing was the thing that I should have introduced. Throttling is, more of a more lower level concept, which probably just free to ignore. Can you, answer that? How did you locally host your backend server using SSH or AWS? What changes did you make in the beginning to get HTTP? Yeah, so I basically fixed CORS. CORS basically means allowing your backend to be accessed by any other front end. One security thing. So the change that I made looks something like this. I can show you. I added these 2 lines of code. I added the CORS module, so npm install CORS, and then I did const CORS equal to require CORS, and then I did app.use CORS, actually calling it. That's what I did high level. More about meetup, I don't even know yet, but Delhi, Bangalore, Chandigarh, 3 meetups we will do for the NetExams community. Can you explain? Okay, throttling the code is not. I don't have a good answer for that question, sir. More about what does response return is the sum, and what does answer have? Oh, so look at the code, right? What does it return? Takes 2 inputs A and B, returns the sum of them back to the front end. So what does the response return? Is it the sum? It is the sum. Look at this code base. It is the sum. Hi, I have a question in mind, different from current topic. Let's suppose we have a domain. I've seen people, they host websites for like blog.xyz.com. What happens there? Does it like a separate, do you have to separately buy it? For example, I only have one Anitex devs domain name, but you can create multiple entries for every subdomain. So if you go here, you will see I have an entry for, some-server.100xdev.com, the class for today, Discord API.100xdev.com, Discord.100xdev.com. So you can create multiple such, subdomains for free. You don't have to individually buy the subdomains. When you get this and not this, for first of all, that is because that is how the syntax is expected in JavaScript. You actually have to call it in onClick and not do it the React way. Can't we put onChange on a second input and only mimic mimic debouncing? Can't we put onChange on the second input only to mimic debouncing. What does on change do? We saw this a while back, and on change wasn't really triggering anything unless, so if I put on change instead of on input, if I refresh this, go to network tab, you see nothing gets called unless I click outside, and then it got called. Yeah, so basically on change is probably not the right way to do it. It's not the same as debouncing and on input. So now you ask the same question again, which I don't understand. Where to learn networking? Any book recommendations? Not many. I did one in college. I don't know the name for. No, I basically no idea. Dude, sorry. Node.js architecture to have request pool. So then why do we need throttling? Good question. That is why I thought I shouldn't have introduced throttling in the first place. Good question. Don't have a good answer. And as I said, probably more related to video whenever you're sending video or WebRTC, and probably not even a concept you need to worry about if you're doing just HTTP. Will there be class next week? There will be a class next week. What is jQuery? It's just a library that was introduced before React that let you do all of this DOM manipulation slightly easily. So the syntax for doing DOM manipulation was slightly easier. No one uses it anymore, so feel free to ignore it. We will understand WebSockets and WebRTC, but in 1 to 100, not in 0 to 1. Can we have assignments of this week as soon as possible? We'll try my best. ChatGPT is using normal API with content type event stream, and ChatGPT server is able to stream data. Oh, interesting. I will take a screenshot of this. When is the right time to start building project? Should we wait for React? Yeah, just wait for React and then do it. Can we put populate diff function directly without wrapping other anonymous function? What is the need for wrapping and what is the difference? Timeout equal to set timeout populate diff. No, you cannot do what you've done for a few reasons. Number one, this syntax itself is incorrect.
So the syntax is incorrect. You're calling populate div right here, which means whatever this guy returns, which in our case was undefined. This is the same as doing this. Because you actually called populate div here, you have to give it the function name and not actually call it. That was the first error here, and I think there's something else you asked here. Wrapping it without wrapping an anonymous function. Okay, basically, I think this is what you asked, and the answer is if you want to do it, you don't have to call it. You have to do it here. Maybe I did not understand your question correctly. That's so feel free to ping a TA or maybe tag me after the class. Decide. We did not decide text color green window. Why can't ChatGPT debounce in the nanosecond to get requests faster? Debouncing does not make requests faster; it makes them slower, right? So
I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly. How would it make it faster if you debounce? Can you assign this? Okay, I'll try to get the assignments as soon as possible. Where to learn networking? But I have no idea. Not related to the class. Number one. Can we get GitHub repo of Harnoor's teaching? Yes. They do exist. There is one repo I'll post it. In like create an assignment button on the website and post it there. For the class portion, a couple of things you mentioned in the class. I hope you have done your homework. I will make sure I ask him that in Harnoor's class Discord video. In his Discord inside video, I wanted to ask, okay, follow the same link. Probably don't join their Discord. I don't think I've taken the permission for that. Can we have a channel for Discord under dev? We can do that. Let me create a channel for under dev in our Discord. Let's not join his Discord. I will try my best for a Mumbai meetup. Most probably won't happen, but we'll try my best. Why is using use state in chat a bad option? I have explained this in my recent live. So go to my recent live to the section where I'm talking about chat. We're implementing chat, and I've explained this specific thing. Please share the detailed syllabus on. I want to get digital signature screenshot lecture because there's not breakout. Allow screenshots might not be possible. Or just ping Rookie. He'll do something for you. And detailed syllabus of Harnoor's this thing I'll get. It's a good point. We'll be discussing database concept like indexing sharding. Yeah, in 1 to 100. That's part of system design. Is debouncing only used with on input? No, it can be used in any place where you want to debounce a specific function call. Debouncing should be done at the user level, correct? Make the request coming from the same user. That is correct. Is it due to JavaScript being single-threaded? It has nothing to do with JavaScript being single-threaded. Where to look? Okay, answer that. Hi, I have a question. Mine, a couple of topics. Let's suppose we answer that. How can I check the number of backend hits if I host it locally using Express? You can, right? You can just count the number of times an HTTP function got called. You can create a global middleware that counts the number of requests. I want to develop a that can we answer that Nipune. Can we start React in most classes? We'll see. I'm happy to introduce it by the end of it. Probably not going to start it. Can't we put on change on the second input only to mimic debouncing? Can't we put on change in the second input? Answer that. Explain what happens with and without the clear timeout. Oh, if you don't have the clear timeout, then you're not debouncing. You're just delaying the calls, right? If you don't have a clear timeout, then you're just delaying the call to populate div by 1 second. But if you do have the clear timeout, then you are like, hey, bhaiya, existing clock stop, new clock start, existing clock stop, new clock start. And that way, only one function call to populate div happens in a certain, time segment. Versus if you don't have clear timeout, then you're just delaying the call to populate div. If there are 20 letters that someone has written, there will be 20 backend calls. How to use Google bot or Twitter bot to get data from sites that tried using slightly off topic question. I'm going to skip. Sorry. Can we answer that? Is JavaScript required for if I'm focused on Python? No. When do for usage similar to mini version of DDoS attack to prevent this server use late limiting, which limits how many. This is your okay. Got it. The on input function calls suppose set timer set to 1 second. Every input the set 1 second in one. What happens to the call stack if multiple function calls? Will it not get overloaded or does it handle it differently? Raj Shikhar, trying to understand your question here. On input function gets called and suppose set timer is for 1 second and then every input set timer will be set for 1 second. In this case, what will happen to the call stack of multiple function calls? Will it not get overloaded or does it get handled different way? So this gets pushed to the call stack. This function gets called, this function gets called, this function gets called. This gets popped off the call stack. This reaches the web API section. This gets popped off the call stack. This does not stay in the call stack for the next 1 second. Hope that's clear. Hope that answers the question as well. What is the different way to create frontend and backend with examples? So this is the first way. Send an HTTP request. Otherwise, WebSockets, bunch of other protocols that you can use for frontends to talk to backends. These are two ways. Well, one way HTTP, but like one library to call it, another library to call it. Can we solve this problem without using global variable? Probably, yeah. I'm sure there's a way to do it. Yeah. Can you explain where the code? Can you explain the code where you did the fetch and a few promises? Can you explain the code where you did the fetch and a few promises? Oh, okay. So basically this code, right? This is confusing a few people. I mean, this will confuse a few people, but generally, eventually we will use Axios, so won't be a problem. But for now, what have I done? Called fetch with that specific input. And this fetch returns a promise, which is why I did a dot then and got a response. And here I did a response.text. Now this also unfortunately returns a promise. Should not ideally, I get it, response, we have access to response.text should be synchronous, but it is asynchronous. So I can either do this response.text dot then do all of this because we know response.text is asynchronous, or I can be like, do this thing which is called promise chaining, which again is debatable whether or not you want to do it, but this is at a high level. Two dot then calls because unfortunately, the fetch call, the second one is also asynchronous. But compared to Axios, Axios is slightly better where you can do this simply. You can do something like this, dot then response, and then log response.data. This will have your final actual
textually type here. You don't have to do the extra asynchronous
call if you're using Axios. Cool. That brings us to the end of this section of questions. I think we'll have to call it here. Thank you everyone for joining. Tomorrow's class, hopefully this one was an easy one, and tomorrow's class we will try to implement a little bit of React, reconcilers, high level conceptual front-end things. Assignment, no other assignment other than the one, create, the interest calculator, maybe write the backend yourself, and then create the front-end and go from there. Cool. All right. Thank you guys. Let's call it here. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 7. Set up backend for fetch. Set up backend for fetch. Unsure if I get the question there. All right, guys. Gonna call it. If you've enrolled if you want to upgrade to a different one, just mail at 100xdevs@gmail.com and they will give you access. Cool. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.